of communism and many other things that we are dealing with right now. Thank you for joining me, James Lindsay.
Hey, glad to be here.
Thank you, sir. First of all, you are in the documentary featured that's coming out or has come out already, Beneath Sheep's Clothing. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about what the movie's about and why you wanted to be involved in that project?
Yeah, it's kind of a neat story, actually. So there's this lady out in Utah. I went out to speak for just some event that a congressional candidate out there put together. And so I spoke, a couple of years ago. And afterwards, people come up to me after you speak and they talk to you. And so this lady, Julie Beeling, comes up to me and she hands me this Kinko's printed out book with a spiral binding down the edge. And she's like, I hope you'll please read my book. This was based off my master's thesis in Russian history and literature. I served my mission for 2 years in Russia right after the Soviet Union collapsed and learned a lot about what's going on. And I'm very concerned about, the woke stuff looking exactly like communism. And I was like, okay, lady, very nice. And I took her book and I just kind of put it on this, off to my left, I have this pile of books that people have given me that I intend to someday get to. Right. And so it stared at me from the top of the pile for a very long time with an awful lot of guilt. Because it was so large, I had to put it in a different pile. So it stayed on top for a long time. And I didn't ever actually open it, rather ashamed to admit. But not so long later, what I didn't know was going on was Julie was so happy that she'd finished her book and finally got it put in order. And she set it up to be, self-published on Amazon and was going to put it out. It's called Beneath Sheep's Clothing. And she went to sleep thinking this is the first night I'm going to be able to sleep in a long time. And I hate to tell her story, but it's a cool story. And she laid down to go to bed and she couldn't sleep. She just saw scenes from the book portrayed like a documentary and like she was watching the documentary on a screen in her head. And so finally she got frustrated, 4 a.m, and she prayed and said, all right, God, if you want it to be a documentary, I don't know how to do that. That's up to you. And went to sleep after the prayer. It helped her get to sleep. And a few weeks later, I guess she had shared it on her Facebook. Some other local filmmaker named Steve Sorensen at Sacred Heart Video or Sacred Heart Media in Utah lives not terribly far, a couple hours away from her, and saw the book and picked it up and contacted her and said, this needs to be a documentary. And so off to the races, within a month of her prayer or whatever, this connection happens. And so they asked me if I would be in the documentary, since I have a lot to say on this as one of the talking heads. And I thought, well, okay, you better read the book. And so I started to read the book thinking this is, not going to be good. And it turns out it's really good. And so one of the, it's extremely thorough, it's extremely detailed, it's extremely accessible. And one of the lines that people credit me with all the time now that I've gone around and said all over the world comes from Julie in this book, which is that communism marries a truth to a lie. It never quite, it does sometimes straight up lie, but it never quite tells the truth. But it usually gives, if we were fact checkers, we would have to rate almost all of their statements as misleading. Like one of the words doesn't mean the right thing, or they try to lead you to draw the wrong conclusions based on the way they've presented the data or the facts or whatever that they've given you. And I was just shocked by how good the book was. So I was excited to be part of the documentary. And so we started filming it, and it was just this kind of like little ragtag, the kind of documentary that would get put together on a prayer. And it's kind of one thing led to another, and just these kind of weird coincidences. We got a great executive producer behind it named Christian Palacios down in Miami. And that was able to really up the production, and now it's fantastic. Not only do I think it's great, but I'm in it. So of course it's awesome. No, but the fact is that the feedback, it came out on Friday and it's now Tuesday. So it's just been up 5 days. And the feedback that I've been getting is everybody has to see this. This movie's going to save the Republic. And it's just hundreds and hundreds of people have sent me messages, including, not just, anonymous people on Twitter or small fries, big people too are this movie is going to save the Republic. And it's fast paced, it's moving, it's deep, it's a fire hose of information. So it's really exciting that has just come out. And I'm grateful in a weird way to Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Walz for putting communism on the ballot. So we're all going to have to talk about it. And here's this film so we can inform
Right.
people at just again, it's like, is this documentary the answer to our prayer? Yeah, it looks like it. And then like its timing is perfectly providential that right after communism goes on the ballot and the whole world starting, Elon Musk is saying they're communist, everybody's saying they're communist. Now there's a film where so people don't have to go sorting through all these long podcasts and books and whatever else. There's a film they can watch.
Yeah.
Okay, so George Orwell famously said, and I'm about to say George Orwell was not necessarily literally correct, but maybe later. George Orwell said, if you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. And he was basing that off of his experience, especially dealing with the English socialists that are known as the Fabian Society, who currently run the UK. So I don't actually expect the boot. I expect a digital boot. I don't expect a physical boot so much. I think that the technology has come along to where there will be some physical boots for the real problem, FBI raids and whatever else. But I would point people to kind of 2 or 3 countries to give them a taste of what communism will look like as it comes to America. And the first of those countries is the UK now, which the point I want to draw people to is how quickly it flipped. We've known that there's been kind of a 2-tier system. We've known that there have been problems. We know there's creeping sustainability requirements, can't touch the Islamophobia issue with a 10-foot pole problem. And then the Labour, which is the Fabian Socialist Party's, it's the Fabian Socialist Society's political party, just won a historically large victory. So you got more socialists stuck into their government at the same time than ever before, headed up at that prime minister spot by Keir Starmer, who they're calling 2-tier Keir because he's put in a 2-tier legal system immediately. It's very obvious that he's made it clear to Muslim agitators that they're invincible legally, and he has stoked tensions, and he's letting these horrific things play out and then punishing the people who complain about them. And so I want people to realize that even as early as, this spring, if you told people, well, Britain's on the tipping edge of communism, they would have laughed at you. They would have said, this isn't real. And now they've got a division, literally Big Brother. They have a division of police whose job it is to watch social media to find out people who are posting things that go against the British government. And in fact, they're trying to figure out a way to extradite Americans who are saying things that they don't like and bring them to the UK and put them in prison. Which is, this is insane levels of communism. And it's just been in the course of a couple of months that it flipped. So it can flip very quickly and can start to look like a 2-tier justice system in the forceful advance of the agenda. I said I was going to give you 3 countries, but let me give you 4 because Canada is another one to look at. Canada is doing some of that, but is primarily just pushing the agenda at full speed, regardless of what people think. And they're going to be bankrupt soon. It is a country in economic free fall. Right now, you have to make an absurd amount of money to not qualify for housing assistance. Like to escape being poor, you have to make like $180,000 a year, $120,000 a year to not be poor, because their housing costs have skyrocketed so much because of the immigrant problem and because of other mismanagement problems. And so look to the UK, look to Canada for the structural collapse, especially of the financial aspects of the country under Harris-Walz ticket, if it's elected, or administration. Then look to South Africa, because that's where we're going to be a few years down the road. South Africa with nicer buildings. They've been mainlining critical race theory in a pressure cooker there for decades, and you can see what it looks like. It's a complete disaster. It is a model. But the real country everybody should be looking at, what will it look like if communism comes to America, is China. It's going to look exactly like China, because China has been the beta test for this model. China, after Mao died, was in economic destruction. It was desperate. And they put one of Mao's longtime right-hand men, Deng Xiaoping, took power. I should say Deng Xiaoping is how you actually say his name. I've been trying to fix myself on that. Deng Xiaoping took power, and he instituted what was called a one country, two systems policy. So they were going to have one country, but it would have a literally, it was going to have a communist system and they say capitalist, but it's not capitalist. It was fascist based off of the production standards of the Nazi regime in Germany. And so they have a literally communist and fascist dual system where the government owns all of the land and the government owns all the raw materials and the government owns some of the heaviest infrastructure, but then private industry can use all of that and implement on all of that to make as much money as they want. So all of a sudden they opened up a productive capacity and they built out the model for the socialism of the future, which is going to have this hybrid corporate oligarchy that serves at the pleasure of and for them, the CCP of a government. For us, it will be what they call the stakeholder system.
Right.
And so this is a fact a lot of people don't know. They've heard the word Soviet Union. They've heard Soviet, that's bad. That sounds like Lenin. That's bad. Stalin was a Soviet. And that's as deep as it goes. Soviet meant workers' council. And so what it was that the workers were supposed to be able to democratically vote on how everything was supposed to work, but you only counted as a worker that could go to the workers' councils if you were actually a party member. And you only counted as somebody who could actually have a vote at all if you were kind of a higher ranking party member. So you had kind of this system of, it's not representatives because nobody voted for them, but you have this system where certain workers speak for all the workers. Well, they've just redone this in stakeholder capitalism. We have the stakeholders who are now going to deal with all the people who have a stake in everything that's made by the corporations and every other institution. And there's a stakeholder council, which I would call a stakeholder Soviet, that's cooking up, ESG criteria, deciding how businesses are going to be run and enforcing them. That's actually Klaus Schwab's word. That's Larry Fink's word that they've used for ESG. We're going to force the corporations to do it. And that was Klaus Schwab. And Larry Fink says we are forcing the corporations to do it using ESG. So we're going to have a stakeholder Soviet running this system in the West instead of the CCP. But it's the same program, same system. And also what you need to understand is a continued degrowth of the West and a continued accelerated growth of China to hand over global power to China. That's right. And a lot of people don't know a couple other things. Speaking of China, people don't know. So you talk about the social credit system. It's on Stanford's website because they have a thing that's called DigiChina where they translate all the big documents out of China and store them on their website. I don't know that this is a corrupt program, but it's certainly a wealth of information if you want to read what the CCP is up to in their own words and translate it into English, as well as Stanford can translate it. But they have a document from 2014 that's easy to find that's the basis for why they're the rationale for their social credit system. And the rationale was, it's like, in order to make a fully modern socialism, like every paragraph is like, for socialism this, for socialism that. And the purpose is just to create the surveillance state and control mechanism and actually self-brainwashing mechanism. A social credit system turns life into a video game where you're trying to win and avoid losing points according to the system. And that system could change at any time. And your job is just to keep your points high enough to be able to play in society. And so what you'll do is you are actually practicing doing what the government wants you to do all the time in order to be able to just have the basic access to participate in society. So it's a brainwashing device in addition to a control device. And it's a very sophisticated one, but it was all designed in China for socialism. But that's 2014. We can go back much earlier to like 78, 79, and 80.
Right.
When I said that Deng Xiaoping inherited a broken China, and so there was a beta test done, you mentioned how the architects of the social credit system and the digital surveillance state are largely American operators. Well, it turns out that the architects of the economic system that Deng Xiaoping employed, where did he get this idea? Did he just say, hey, let's pull in some fascist Nazi stuff and like make China great again? No, that's not what he said. Actually, Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller went to China and met with Deng Xiaoping. There's even a movie about the opposite side of this where Deng Xiaoping came to New York, or to Washington, I'm sorry. I think it's called Mr. Deng Goes to Washington. And you can actually see this. So you've got Brzezinski, you've got Rockefeller, you've got Kissinger meeting with Deng Xiaoping and his delegation, including somebody that very rarely is ever mentioned, which is allegedly, I can't find hard evidence that he was there, but allegedly, from what I've heard, is that T.H. Chan was there. T.H. Chan being who Harvard's public health school is named after, which was done in donation by his children, Ronnie and Gerald Chan. No, wait, is that, yeah, Gerald. I think that's right. But you can look all that up and check the names and all that. Ronnie Chan is certainly the kind of operative. He runs the Morningside Foundation. They're tied in with the Asia Society, which is like the CFR for China. And so when we say that this was like facilitated by American operatives, it was orchestrated by American operatives. And the reason was to create this gigantic economic reservoir. If we take the ideological motivations out, is Kissinger a communist? I don't know. He's a globalist. Was Rockefeller a communist? I don't know, but he certainly funded a lot of it. If we take the ideological motivations out and just look at it in, prosaic brass tacks, you're going to build the manufacturing base for cheap economic manufacturing in China. You're going to build up the Chinese economy so that you end up with the largest consumer economy in the world. And you can just picture these, businessmen with dollar signs just scribbled all over their faces to make this happen. So, and then on the other hand, China not only gets to get out of the worst abject destruction that any country has ever been put through following the disastrous reign of Mao Zedong, but they also, Deng Xiaoping was a very savvy operator. They get to create the opportunity for themselves to have this huge geopolitical advantage, which is that they're going to be the world's manufacturer, which means if they don't want to ship goods, say to the United States, because they go to war with the US, they don't have to. They get to be the world's economic heavyweight where everybody wants access to their market, so they get to control terms of access to their market. So strategically, this was a huge win for China. I don't know if the US State Department thought, we'll give them all the benefit of the doubt for a moment. I don't know if they thought, as Vivek Ramaswamy has suggested, that they would be able to bringing capitalist aspects into the Chinese market, that they would get the Chinese people to revolt and get rid of communism there. But that's not what happened. They got played. Or it was orchestrated all along to create global communism, because as China rises, we're going to point out that we're not competitive anymore. So we have to start to model their system, copy parts of their system. And then at the crucial moment when China decides it wants to have the power, if you've weakened the West, say through degrowth methods, green energy, blah, 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 and it doesn't have the ability to manufacture, it doesn't have the ability to fight, it doesn't have adequate food or energy resources, they aren't going to fight a war with China to protect their interests. They're going to say, okay, fine, China's in charge, and you hand off global hegemony to the CCP. And I guarantee you that the CCP, being a communist country, isn't going to take global hegemony and say, well, everybody can do what they want.
No.
Everybody's going to start going communist. So the model, Paris Waltz as a ticket, is opening the door. Actually, they've already kicked the door open with Biden's administration, but it's technically would be us fully opening the door, like we just saw in Britain, to a global China. Yeah, well, the word you were looking for instead of odd is weird, right? The projection. They started to say that Trump and Vance and MAGA are weird because they had to cover up for the fact that Tiananmen Tim is super weird, and the conditions around Tiananmen Tim, aka Tim Waltz, are super weird, and everything they do is super weird. So they had to project off the word weird, as you can imagine. It's the deplorable of 2024. It turns out deplorables was a little too hard and backfired on Hillary Clinton in 2016. So this is the softer version that they think won't backfire, but it's also a projection to cover up for Tiananmen Tim Waltz and the obviously kind of like goofball communist woke functionary thing that they've got going on that's extremely academic in its roots. So yeah, the universities are the primary entities that I think betrayed us. I think there's not actually a better example of the weird thing I was just talking about, and that the universities are somehow deep into this, than this Australian breakdancer who just went and humiliated her country. It was so bad, there will not be breakdancing in the Olympics anymore. Person got a 0 points.
I couldn't even believe it. I thought it was
now
like
they're blaming the judges, and the Australian media, which is totally the Marxist press there, is backing up the breakdancer and saying the judges are contaminated and people don't understand, and it's sexism, all the normal stuff. All this the way that the theory has manifested that has been taken advantage of came through our universities. And now I think, as far as China goes, which is what your question was, I think China has been using our universities to spy for a long time, but I don't think that they were actually hip to how effective woke is to propagandize until much more recently. There was actually almost a shift during the kind of George Floyd, where China kind of had this moment where they're like, oh, Beisel, the white left, that we can push on that. But before that, I don't think they really had it. It was largely the Western nonprofit, the left Western nonprofit sector, the Open Society Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Tides Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so on, that were primarily the ones doing it. But I recently learned, and yes, they'll use universities as a vehicle, and yes, we know they're paying for some of these things. But I recently learned that the Chinese government, and I don't know how long this is, I don't know how this has changed over time, but is currently spending $16 billion a year as a military effort just to do propaganda campaigns against the West, or I think against the US, honestly. And so you can imagine what vehicles those would take, obviously, to be pushing disinformation on social media, to be getting into mass media, to be influencing, journalists and so on. But it would also take the form of propping up universities and things. So I bring you back to Ronnie Chan and the Morningside Foundation making a almost $500 million donation in 2014 to Harvard to effectively purchase what's now called the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So imagine them buying a giant school of public health with high prestige right before a global pandemic, right? Yeah. And so there is certainly that element. As far as the woke side of it, I think they were pretty late to the game, but for the public health side, I don't think they were. They've been buying influence within universities and driving influence in universities, I think, at least since 2014, probably earlier. Since then, the Morningside Foundation has funded several other major schools of public health to the tunes of somewhere between $100 and $200 million as well. So yeah, China is putting forth in a considerable effort to subvert our knowledge producing and authenticating institutions and to mislead Americans, not just American students who are going through the programs, but particularly to mislead American institutions that depend on the research produced by those institutions. Yeah, it looks very much like, I don't know that they're necessarily running the country or the Western world. They're certainly not running China. But it does look like they are the lever that's making us do everything. So they are, the whole public-private partnership model means that they're working directly with governments to make things more, more opportune for them. And then they're playing in the field that they're creating. So they are certainly the heart of the problem. ESG and its new branding are certainly the heart of the Western degrowth agenda that makes all of this possible. And if you're degrowing something that's a large set of valuable assets, then obviously liquidating America is a good way to put it. Another character, although he's very old at this point and probably personally not the big monster, would be, of course, George Soros. And I don't bring Soros up because we always have to bring up George Soros. I want people to understand that in Alchemy of Finance, which he wrote in 1992, George Soros confesses explicitly that one of his malicious pleasures that he took as an investor his entire career, that's how he describes it, that's his words, malicious pleasures, is to short sell institutional favorites. And so his belief is for this thing called an open society. So he doesn't agree with the Chinese model. He's not a friend of China. China called him a demon on social media last year. So they're certainly not friends. They've named him a terrorist. I think he would be arrested on sight if he went to China. So George Soros is no friend to China because China has what you would call a closed society, but he wants what he calls an open society, hence Open Society Foundation, which is taken from his mentor, Karl Popper, who wrote Open Society and Its Enemies in 1945, trying to make sense of the Nazis. And so Soros's vision for this open society is blocked by wealthy countries, whether it's the United States or whether it's China. A wealthy, powerful country can tell other people, no, you can't cross the border. No, you can't have our money. No, our currency will be the reserve currency and you're going to do business in our currency. So it's not like his vision, he describes it as a global EU, sorry, not United Nations, a global EU, a global European Union. And where you could, your passport just gets you anywhere you want to go. There's no stress. Everything's fine. The borders are kind of fake. And, there's a single currency and a single reserve bank and all of this stuff. He says this is his vision. And the depth and strength of the United States stands in the way of that. And so he has an agenda, or has had an agenda, to short sell, not to liquidate, but to short sell this institutional favorite called the United States or Western civilization. Well, how would you do that? Well, if you wanted to short sell say a company, what you would have to do is convince people that the asset is overvalued, and then wait for something that triggers a collapse in the value while you hold a short position in the stocks. So if it's Boeing, you decide to make sure that you fund journalists who publish every possible story they can find about a toilet backing up, about having to turn around, about a tire change that didn't go right. Of course, when a tire falls off, that's a story too, or, a cracked windshield, some of which are real issues, and some of which are, routine maintenance issues. Oh, and of course it was a Boeing jet with somebody backed up a toilet, right? It doesn't matter if somebody backed up a toilet. First of all, it's not news. And second of all, it doesn't matter what kind of jet it was. It matters, what that guy ate before he went in the bathroom or something. And so you do this to make people hear Boeing, bad news, Boeing, bad news, Boeing, bad news, over and over and over again, right? And then you wait for something bad to happen, like a door blowing off because of a failed bolt, and then you can plummet their stock value and do your short sell, right? That's how you would do this. That's how you create an artificial bank run or a stock run on a company and win on a short sell. He calls that method reflexivity and describes exactly how to do it for the whole book. That's the point of the book. Well, how would you do it to America? Well, you would get children to go to schools that teach them that America and its history and its founders are bad people, right, and that you would make the experience of living in America worse by flooding it with immigrants that water down the culture, put stress on the system, make everything seem unfair, make things dangerous. You would fund DAs not to prosecute crime in the city so that it seems like a very dangerous place, an unpleasant place to be, so that people's perception, because he says reflexivity works not based on reality, but on people's mistaken perceptions about reality. So you would fund everything you can to create a perception in the population that America is not nearly as good as people believe it is. And then it's in a precarious position of being perceived to be overvalued, in which means you only need one little spark to cause the whole thing to topple, and then you can short sell America. So Larry Fink is over here liquidating America, and George Soros, for literally similar but different purposes, is over here trying to short sell America because he thinks that it's in the interest of building some utopian open society where borders don't matter and everybody gets along and sings Kumbaya all the time. And these are the major funding pressures that are pushing virtually everything that we're dealing with, aside from the weirdos, like the Rockefellers, who are into this, transform humanity to its next spiritual level cult, which turns out to be the same motivation as communists have, just in slightly different, framing. Right. So we have this kind of convergence of all these things happening at once. But yeah, that's, I think, what's happening. And, BlackRock, Vanguard, and I read at least a year and a half ago, I don't know where it is now, but one of the statistics I came across a little over a year ago, so it's likely to be somewhat outdated now, was that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which are the three biggest asset managers together, own or controlled the shares of 40% of the entire S&P 500.
Yeah.
Not 40% of Boeing, 40% of the entire S&P 500. Right. No, I agree. So I draw you back to what we were talking about before. And Americans, most Americans have heard of Mao. A lot of people have heard of Mao, but very few still have heard of Deng Xiaoping. Mao died. Nobody cared what happened next. And so very few are aware of Deng Xiaoping theory. In particular, it's, like I said, one country, two systems. This is what you're looking at. So how does the Chinese system work? Well, yeah, there's private enterprise. The big corporations are making money hand over fist. We call them crazy rich Asians. We know about that. And that's fine, as long as the state, or in this case, it would be whatever this consortium is, the United Nations, as long as the state owns the raw materials and the land upon which it's all done. So you're looking at land grabs and raw material control grabs happening from now the United Nations. So what you're looking at is setting up two centers of world power, those being the CCP and the United Nations, which I think are frenemies, so to speak. They interact. I think they both expect to betray the other later. Yeah. And my point being that what we're looking at is the same model. So earlier you asked, what does the future look like? And I said, under communism. And I said, it looks like China. Well, it's going to be this same thing, this one country or one West, really, one United Nations, two systems. And the two systems are going to be implemented in the exact same way. We're going to have this corporate oligarchy. So the corporations with ESG, we are suffering ESG because it messes up our lives and it, hampers us to be able to build small businesses and so on. The corporations are playing Hunger Games over ESG, right? And so the corporations that are the most, why are the corporations losing money in billions of dollars and bending over backwards to stay ESG compliant? Because they know that when the system change comes, whoever was the most loyal and effective at trying to implement the change beforehand are going to be the only companies left. They'll be the monopolies that run the world in the corporate oligarchy that we're going to have as part of the two systems. The other system is that the United Nations, as a world governing body, is going to run everything.
Right.
And like you said, they're wanting to put teeth in it. And if you actually go back to before the Millennium Assembly and the Millennium Assembly, what their vision for this century and actually for this entire third millennium is insane. It's literally to seize control, not just of a world government and a world currency and to create a United States of Earth or a world union or something like that, or Earth Union. But it's also, they say that the purpose of that entity will be to, and this is Robert Mueller is the guy's name I'm quoting, so it's not that Robert Mueller.
No, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah,
the Lucis Trust, Robert Mueller.
That's right, the Lucis Trust, Robert Mueller. That's exactly right. The University for Peace, Robert Mueller, not the FBI guy who went after Trump.
Equally awful.
Equally awful. Well, maybe, I don't know. different people, different spellings to their last name. It's not the same guy. It's unfortunate that it's confusing. But what Robert Mueller said was that the point of the United Nations will be to seize control of the evolution of Earth and all of its organisms, including man.
Right.
And so that's straight up eugenics. That's straight up, we're going to figure out who's worthy to live and who's worthy to die and who's going to have access and who's not going to have access, so that they can direct, as they phrase it, the spiritual evolution of man to be more and more and more in line with the theory of cooperation. In other words, communism. Well, I'll tell you what you just said at that last part. I can't tell you how it's going to play out. Everything is
so insane.
And nothing is true for the next few months. But I can tell you that, like, I got a message today. This sweet lady sent me this note. What do I do? Here's what I have available to me. And I was like, get your friends to vote.
Right.
And the Turning Point USA is doing an admirable job, literally getting people out there to, hound people into registering to vote, showing up to vote, sending in their ballots, to follow up with them. The same thing Democrat machine has been doing for a while. Turning Point USA took it upon themselves to build this. So you can support that effort. That takes money, that takes time, it takes volunteers, it takes, a lot of stuff. So maybe you can look them up and, and get involved in that. It's a huge deal. And it's also smart and targeted. It's working particularly in these swing states, because you're absolutely right. If it doesn't matter what the state of the election is, if Harris Waltz gets one more ballot or one more electoral vote than Trump, they're going to take it as a, universal mandate to implement the full blast policies that they think that they need to do, and they're not going to hesitate. It's going to be, rule by executive order like we've never seen before. And then we still don't know what's even going to happen with Congress. Maybe they end up with a very sympathetic Congress as well through whatever, election machinery they end up using. And so we've got to, as Trump calls it, swamp the vote. We've got to make sure there are so many ballots that it looks like Venezuela if they try to fool with it. And if they don't fool with it, then we just win. And we win big, and we win across the board. And like you said, that sand in the gears actually can turn into a mandate to say no to communism. This is actually why, not to, shill too much, but to bounce back to that film, we made Beneath Sheep's Clothing because, I've written like 10 books. Some people read. I'm on social media every day. So I talk to my bubble, and, I make podcasts. So I got my fan base and my email list or whatever, but to reach people, like, you've got to hit them with art. You've got to hit them with something that stirs them, that they don't have to. A book is a total huge investment. I read every day for work, and every time I have to buy a new book, I can another book, But to sit down for an hour and a half and watch a movie is a much lower, interesting, fun, driving, engaging movie is a lot lower barrier to entry. But I think what we have to do is we have to force the conversation also. People like you and I, it's not just about getting people to vote or watching a movie. We've got to, and the movie should help, but the point is to force the conversation that it is America versus communism is this election.
Yes.
And if you vote your way into communism, look at the UK and see how fast it gets bad. And it's going to they will make it bad faster because they know they have very limited time in which to work if they don't. Typically, the first thing, if you look at Lenin, if you look at Mao, if you look at, Castro, I didn't throw in Stalin because Stalin was inheriting from Lenin. But you look at these communist dictators that took a revolution, and the first thing they do is a massive, Maduro, it doesn't matter, you pick, they do a massive power consolidation within the first month that they're in office. So everything goes from being normal to tyrannical almost overnight. And there's almost it's a complete blitzkrieg. And I think that it's incumbent on us to get information out there to help people see what's going on and to get them to understand that this is actually what is happening. This isn't like some vague, this is the most important election of your life.
No.
You are voting for America versus communism. And that's what this election is. Yeah, all of my resources are on a website called New Discourses, which is at newdiscourses.com. And you can find me on social media at Conceptual James, everywhere but Facebook, which kicked me off for life. So everywhere but Facebook, you can find me at Conceptual James. And if you need the website, I know you're about to play the trailer and it's at the end, but it's beneathsheepsclothing.movie. All is one long word.